Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome along to this Fusion21 webinar, which is about the launch of our new and exciting building safety and compliance webinar. For those that don't know, my name's Andrew Gray. I'm the Member Relationships Manager at Fusion21. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues, Phil Woodhead, who's the Category Manager, Peter Beck, who's the Framework Manager, and Sarah Maguire, who's our Social Value Manager. So a big welcome to you three, and a big welcome to you all, our audience. Just in case you're not familiar, and I'm sure you're bored with this by now, but anyway, I'll go through the housekeeping. So if you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, you should have a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you press the orange tab, that will minimize the panel and you can see more of the presentation. If you're having any difficulties with audio, you can adjust the audio settings using the audio tab. So sometimes if those audio's problems persist, we've often found that logging out and logging back in again can often solve the problem. And then finally, whilst you, the audience, is on mute and will remain so for throughout the webinar this afternoon, please do, if you have any questions, use the question box in the bottom panel, and we will endeavour to answer as many of those as we can. So that's enough of my introduction, and so without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Phil.
Thanks, Andrew. So today, what I'd like to do is briefly introduce you to Fusion21, particularly for those people that have joined us that don't know Fusion21. We're going to talk about how frameworks work briefly, then get into this framework specifically, so background to the framework, and Peter's going to tell you more about the lots and how to access the framework. And then finally, Sarah will tell you about the social value built into the framework as well. So next slide, please, Andrew. My introduction is just to tell you a very little bit about Fusion21 to start with. So the purpose of Fusion21, we really have two objectives: delivering value for money, and we do that through our procurement activities, and delivering social value. We also do that through our procurement activities, but we also have some other enterprises as well. So probably the largest part of Fusion21, the piece that most people recognise, is our procurement services, and that's where Peter and I work, and they're our main two goals. So next slide, please, Andrew. Fusion21, we were established in 2002 when a number of housing providers joined together to benefit from aggregated spend, so that period leading up to decent homes. And as part of that, at the time, they wanted to put training into the workforce. Essentially, there's a shortage of labour. How do we get aggregated spend, and how do we deliver that? So there's a big investment in training and apprentices, and hence Fusion20 will be formed. Fast forward to 2021, and the model doesn't operate in quite the same way, but we stick with those two founding objectives of social value and value for money. We'll just go about that differently. So Fusion21 is a membership organisation, and so in order for a public sector organisation to use Fusion21, they do need to become a member, but we now operate nationally across the whole of the UK. We specialise in the built environment, and our frameworks cover a wide variety of built environment activities, from energy efficiency to modular buildings, and today specifically we're going to talk about building safety and compliance. And the titles grown and developed from our old framework, which we called Compliance and FM, and that's to reflect probably where the sort of sector has moved to, or the sectors have moved to, in terms of that agenda and the key around safety. I think it's just worth mentioning as well, one thing: in recent years we invested heavily in SIPs. So many of our teams come very technical backgrounds, which is great for supporting members with their projects and their technical needs, but actually that investment in us training our staff in SIPs has really moved the organisation to the next level as well. So we see benefits for us in terms of our staff, but also we see benefits in terms of the service we're providing to our members as well. And that's really starting to come through now. We've been doing that for a few years. Next slide, please. So I don't want today to be too salesy, but I think it's just worth touching on some of the membership benefits. So we hope that through using Fusion21 frameworks that we can help you reduce the cost of running your own procurement exercises, and that we can increase the capacity of your existing teams. So often we work very closely with our members as an extension of their own team, and that relationship means that we can do, depending on your needs, as much or as little of a procurement process as you want. You know, we're an established framework provider, so we're working to ISO processes, contract regs, and keeping up to date all the time. And that piece here that I've talked about in terms of social value is built and designed into our frameworks. So there's just a few sort of whistle-stop benefits of being a member. So the next slide, please. In terms of who can use a framework, just in case anyone was wondering, our frameworks are open to the entire public sector. So if you are essentially, in a nutshell, receipt of public funds, it is almost certain or highly likely you can use our frameworks. So the descriptors for the permissible users on the contract notices and the ITTs and for membership are very broad. So if you wonder, can I use it? The answer is pretty much yes. There are some very niche exclusions to that, and we would identify those if that was ever in one of those situations. Next slide, please. So over the last sort of 6, 7, 8 years, the membership has grown quite significantly. You can see on the left-hand side of the chart there. And I think the right-hand side of the chart just illustrates the sectors that we work in, between, let's say, our original market in housing, but in education, blue light, and other public sector organisations. For me, the local authority piece of that chart is really interesting because more and more local authorities are working across multiple directorates between housing and education and corporate, and we've got a few of those now, and that's really refreshing to see organisations becoming less siloed and breaking down some of those barriers. Next slide, please. So if you haven't used a framework before, it can be a bit daunting, I guess, and this picture is really just to illustrate actually it's quite a simple process and it's quite a simple end result. So essentially for when we set up and set up frameworks, we put in place a framework agreement between Fusion21 and all of the suppliers on each framework. So that's agreement between us and the supplier. When you as members or prospective members join Fusion21 and the members consortium, essentially you agree to our terms of membership, which is pretty light touch, but does cover things like confidentiality, etc. And so we have an agreement with our members. And then ultimately, when we run a competition, we end up with a call-off contract. And I say we, you. So it is a traditional client-contract relationship between our members and suppliers, and we're not party to those contracts. So essentially, you members are expected, and members do, run and manage their own frameworks, their own projects once they're live. We're just there predominantly at the front end to help procure in the first place, but we do also sit in the background. So if there's any issues with the life of that project, we're on the end of the telephone as well. And depending on the project, there are projects we get more involved for the life of the project. So particularly with things like our heating projects and some of our larger FM projects, but there will be probably smaller value projects where we sit there in the background and we're only there if you ask for us and if you need that support. So I think hopefully that demystifies frameworks. It's at the end of the day, it's a simple client contract relationship at the end of the day. Next slide, please, Andrew. So enough of the generic stuff talking about Fusion21 and enough of the sort of trying to tell you about frameworks, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that already. Today we're going to talk about the new Building Safety and Compliance Framework. We've had an existing Compliance FM framework running for 4 years, and so this is our 3rd generation of that framework. We've broken the old framework into main pieces, one being building safety and compliance to focus on the compliance aspects, so asbestos, legionella, fire, electrical safety. and workplace facilities to look at those bundled total FM, soft services, hard services type contracts. So it gives us focus internally within Fusion21, and I think gives us two distinct and stronger offers for that. Without, I think the old offer was confused in places, and it does give us clarity moving forward. So we now have that focus on those two specific disciplines. It's worth saying that the framework itself has been quite a long time in the making. So we went through some pre-market engagement with members, with suppliers, and over the course of the last 12 months, we've been developing this framework, and we did get quite a bit of interest with over 250 bidders, sort of 700 individual bids, which did make evaluation quite an interesting exercise. But we're pleased to say that we've got there, and we think we've got a really strong outcome. So next slide, please. The framework itself is broken down into 4 individual countries, so England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. That does not limit to Calloff, so Calloff can cross countries and it can cross regions within England. So notionally they work to the NUTS regions as they are. Each of those countries does have its own pricing document, so the prices are specific to the country. Within England, we've adopted the model that we used previously around a regional variation to a base price. So bidders can choose to bid for, or did choose to bid for, any country or any region in any combination. For England, the base price was out of London, and as I said, the prices will vary based on the regions that are applicable to the project. When we set up the framework, we wanted regional suppliers that could evidence good delivery in their regions, which is partly why we've gone for the regional approach. If we hadn't broken down England to those individual regions, what we tended to find previously is you end up with parts of the country where you don't get the right coverage, and it's about attracting those SMEs that maybe only work in one region and don't want to be scared off by a framework that's for the whole of England, and they say, well, we can't deliver the whole of England, so we're not going to apply. And that strategies work very well with this framework as with previous frameworks. Next slide, please. Next message for me really is to say that this framework complements some other frameworks. So for us, provides it is the heart of our compliance and building safety offer, but it's not the only part of that offer. So we have, you see top left, heating renewables framework, bottom right, our lifts framework. We have our sprinkler DPS. If you've got large capital programs for lots of fire doors, that might be, for example, our construction improvement works framework. So we've got a number of other frameworks that sit around this, but collectively we glue that together. We cover the big 6. And that's our new sort of what we're calling building safety and compliance offer overall. And the title, it is lent a little bit from the new sort of building safety bill, but it isn't fire safety exclusively. So you'll see that there are other components, and it's recognising that our members do have a range of compliance needs that aren't solely fire safety, even though that is the topic of the day. Next slide, please. So just to look at some of the key features of the framework. So as I said, we've taken a fresh look with this framework. It wasn't quite a blank piece of paper. We've sort of taken an old wagon wheel and taken it off and serviced it and chopped off some of the corners, and we've got a new shiny wheel that we didn't start from scratch. So we do have some new specifications, new KPIs, new pricing documents, and we have some really good internal sort of healthy discussion around how we shape the framework, how we shape the lots, and discussions with members and suppliers as well to help inform that decision-making process. What we really wanted, as with the old framework, was a framework of competent suppliers. So we should be, and we are, happy that you can take any single one of those suppliers and they will do a good job for our members. And part of building that this time, we had a reviewed look at the mandatory criteria for each of those services. We strengthened those, particularly around fire safety, in light of the sort of, and we were sort of already on this agenda around SKEB. It's now got some acronym and a name, but those competencies the mandatory criteria that contractors need to meet to be able to demonstrate competency, so that our members can have assurance that the contractors have the right systems, processes, training, workforce, etc., 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 to deliver work competently on site. So we've designed the framework to be sector neutral. I appreciate, a lot of our work is in housing, but as you've seen before, we also have huge chunks of work in education and other parts of the public sector. So the framework itself does have some housing specific pricing for those sort of long-term members of ours, but it also has models based on metered square, etc., etc., etc. So it is fully open to anyone in the public sector. The majority of the pricing documents have a cost reimbursable model, and that's to allow for direct awards and the flexibility to meet different members' requirements. I think it's always a struggle to, at framework stage, anticipate all of the different scenarios that can arrive. What we wanted to make sure is that we have a flexible model that can adapt to those different needs and wants of members. I think at the time of writing, we're pre-Brexit, we're pre the building safety bill. We've got little bits of insights of where some of this is going to land, but we don't have the end game. So we're building a framework that needs to adapt to different requirements. And I think the advantage that we have with that is keeping that in mind, which is, a framework has to last for 4 years. How does the framework adapt and mold over those 4 years? And I think we've done that quite well. It's worth saying that we have taken through a few more suppliers than we might otherwise have done, let's say 4 years ago. Particularly in fire safety, we are acutely aware of the potential sort of capacity issues coming with the new building safety bill and the change to the regulations. I think when you look at some of those lists, even to us, they look quite large. But actually, we did quite a lot of work in filtering those down by the individual regions. And actually, when you look at any one region or country within the framework, actually the lists become a more manageable number. So if you see lots of names when you go and look at the website later, don't be scared off. So that's enough of me talking. I'm now going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the framework, starting with talking about the individual lots. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. Next slide, please, Andrew. So the new framework is broken down into 14 lots, and as you can see, our existing members have used this before. The first lots essentially mirror the old compliance framework. So we've asbestos, lot 1, asbestos surveying and consultancy, which will include analysis, air monitoring, training and other such services. Lot 2, asbestos abatement and removal, which will include encapsulation, disposal and making good and other related services. Lot 3, we have Legionella and water hygiene consultancy, which includes for undertaking risk assessments, producing written schemes and management plans. Lot 4, Legionella monitoring and control, which includes Legionella monitoring, system labelling, temperature monitoring, TMV testing, water sampling and testing, system and tank chlorination and other remedial works. Next slide, please, Andrew. So lots 5 to 10 are where we've really developed the framework. And lot 5, fire safety surveying, engineering and consultancy. As we say, it's intended to be multidisciplinary. So we see there'll be surveyors, inspectors, fire engineers, structural engineers, risk assessors, all working together from different disciplines to provide the service. And we see this as being visual and intrusive building surveys, internal, external inspections, compartmentation surveys, 3D scanning and BIM modelling. Hopefully we'll cover all necessary fire engineering design and strategy. Lot 6 is very similar once again to the original framework, covering fire risk assessments. It may also include management of notices of deficiency and prohibition notices. Indicatively, this lot is intended not to cover complex buildings. Lot 7, fire safety inspections, will include routine ad hoc inspection of buildings and fire doors relating to fire safety, health and safety and other standards. For example, means of warning and escape, spread of fire, firefighting installations and equipment. Lot 8, our passive fire protection fire doors lot will include design, supply, installation and maintenance and repair of fire doors and other related works. Lot 9, fire stopping will include installation and upgrading of passive fire safety measures to provide fire-rated building compartments to prevent the spread of smoke and fire. This will include fire stopping, fire-resistant glazing, incandescent vents and related works. And finally, lot 10, active fire safety, will include fire detection, alarm systems, evacuation systems, refuge intercoms, smoke alarms, emergency lighting, sprinklers, ALVs and similar. Next slide, please, Andrew. Lot 11 may be familiar to some of them, electrical and testing and electrical works, which will include your EICRs and PAT testing, and will also include lightning conductor testing. Lot 12, electronic security, will include your door entries, access control, CCTV, gates, barriers, intruder alarms, and also TV aerial equipment and related works. Lot 13 will cover ward and call and telehealth, which will be the design, installation, maintenance, inspection and testing of ward and call systems and remote health monitoring systems. And the final lot, which is a completely new lot, which we feel will enhance our offer across all sectors, is local exhaust ventilation, which, as it says, covers design and installation, maintenance, inspection and testing of equipment for local exhaust ventilation, such as fume cupboards. Thank you. Next slide, Andrew. So the framework was tendered via the Delta resourcing portal, and as such, most of the competitions that we will carry out will be via the Delta resourcing portal. But you as a member may wish to run the competition on your own system, whether it be in TEND, and that's totally acceptable. The evaluation criteria of the framework was set at 60% quality and 40% price, but for the purposes of a further competition, can be altered plus or minus 20% depending on you, the members' requirements, and where your priorities lie. Next slide, please, Andrew. As Phil alluded to earlier, we had 262 bids and we have 175 successful suppliers, of which 88 are SMEs. Next slide, please, Andrew. Not wanting to have too many wordy slides, if you want to see a list of the suppliers and lots, they've gone live on our website today. Next slide, please, Andrew. So I'd like to talk briefly about our service levels. We offer a direct award model where, as with many frameworks, you can direct award to the #1 ranked, who've been ranked on meet criteria. You don't always have to stay with the #1 ranked if you have a business case to do so. Schedule 13 of the framework agreement allows for this, and I'll come to that later on. We offer access only, where it's minimal input from Fusion21. Member comes to us with a need, we give them a list of suppliers and they may run the process themselves. And at the end, we offer a critical friend review. We'll look at the documentation, maybe give it a little bit of advice. Third service level is managed procurement, where we can provide specification, run the whole procurement for you. We'll assess the pricing submissions and do the whole evaluation, whole final evaluation. And finally, we've got a partnership with a turnkey. We'll do everything we can from start to finish. Next slide, please, Andrew. So I'd like to talk about the call-off options. Our main two are a direct award or a single stage for the competition. With a direct award, we can select a supplier without reopening the competition, utilising the costs and rates provided within the framework. With direct award negotiation, we select a supplier without reopening the competition, utilising fixed cost elements, including overheads, profits and prelims. Number 3 is a single stage further competition, where we select a supplier by running a competition amongst the suppliers appointed to the framework for the relevant lot and region. The difference this time is that we have the four nations, so we can run a competition in Scotland, we can run a competition in Northern Ireland or Wales, or across the borders, as Phil alluded to earlier. Next slide, please, Andrew. As I mentioned earlier, Schedule 13 of the Framework Agreement allows members to direct award to a supplier who may not necessarily be number 1 ranked, providing they've got a robust business case to do so. This could be by reference to business needs, brief specification, maybe a specialism or some close protocol equipment. Could even be geography or the number of Calloffs currently awarded to the organisation, or poor performance. We will help to develop the business case with the member and produce a direct award report to reflect this. Next slide, please, Andrew. And now on to Sarah, who's going to talk to you about the social value built into the framework.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Andrew said at the beginning, I'm Sarah Maguire and I am the Social Value Manager at Fusion21. And it's my job this afternoon just to spend a few minutes chatting through how social value is embedded in all of the frameworks that Fusion21 manage, and specifically how it's built into the Building Safety and Compliance framework. Thanks, Andrew. So I'll start just briefly by mentioning the why and the how. Why do we deliver social value through all of our frameworks? We do it because the Public Services Act of 2012, almost 10 years ago now, places an obligation on all public service organisations to consider how they deliver social value through their procurement exercises. But more importantly than that, actually, we do it because we know that it's important to our members, because it's part and parcel of the work that you deliver in neighbourhoods and in communities. The how social value is delivered. So social value is embedded in all of our frameworks at Fusion21. And as a result of that, it's embedded in all of the lots and all of the contracts which are secured through those lots and through those frameworks. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Thank you, Andrew. So we operate a flexible credit model to deliver social value through this framework, which was created in consultation. And what that means is that we expect our suppliers to deliver 10 social value credits for every £100,000 of contract spend. And I'll talk on the next slide in some of the detail around that. What's important about the social value delivery through our contracts is that it starts with a conversation between the member and the appointed supplier to agree what's realistic for the project. So we would encourage you, before you engage in those conversations as procurement managers, to look inwards at your organisation, at what your social value priorities are. So talk to your social value teams if you have them. If you don't have them, talk to your neighbourhood and community regeneration teams. Get a feel for the sorts of things they're working on, the priorities that they're working towards, and consider how they can be delivered through these procurement contracts. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so this is the credit model in a bit more detail. You'll see on the left all of the themes and the social value outcomes, and then on the right you'll see we've allocated a credit amount to each of those outcomes. So if you consider 10 social value credits per £100,000 of spend on some of the smaller contracts, there's lots of different options for you about how social value can be delivered. It could be a project in a school, it could be some training for local community members, it could be a donation of time or money back to a local community group or charity. For the bigger contracts, where a contract is worth over £500,000, the framework agreement sets out an expectation that those larger contracts will yield employment and apprenticeship outcomes. So on the contracts that are worth millions of pounds, it wouldn't be acceptable for those credits to be made up of 100 school visits. It would have to be something a little bit more than that had an impact on the employment and apprenticeship opportunities for your local residents. Thanks, Andrew. So just to summarise, we have designed the credit model to be two things: to be easy and to be flexible, and to be based on the need that you know is in your local area with the people that you serve. We have project plans that sit in the background, and we can support you to agree those at the start. And we also take a leading role in pulling together all of that data around social value delivery on an annual basis. So we'll be speaking to all of our suppliers, that's across the board, across all of the frameworks, annually at the moment, to look at what social value is being achieved, and we'll then feed that back to our members. We have a dedicated social value team at Fusion21, which I manage. So if you ever have any questions or you need some support with your social value delivery, I'm the person to contact, and that's my email address. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. So next slide, please, for the next steps, Andrew. So benefits of using the Building Safety and Compliance Framework for our members. We have pre-approved, vetted, experienced and accredited suppliers. Hopefully a comprehensive range of works and services around safety and compliance. Flexible approaches to sourcing and procurement and pricing. We've got direct award, further competition call-off mechanisms available, and as Sarah capably told us then, social value is built into the framework and can be monitored, reported and reported against. We also do ongoing supplier monitoring and have a suite of KPIs available. You go to the next slide, please, Andrew. So my name's Peter Beck. I'm the framework manager for compliance. So if you've any inquiries regarding the framework, please contact me on the email or number shown on the screen. If not, you can always use the info box and your request will come directly to me. Thank you. Next slide, Andrew. I'll pass you back to Andrew, who may have hopefully some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yep, as Peter said, please do use the question box if you have any questions. If I'm perfectly honest, I can't see any yet, so I'll give you just a couple of minutes to see if you have any more questions. No, you're all obviously either thoroughly intrigued by what you've heard. I daren't say, or have decided something else. Excellent, a question coming in. So we mentioned vetted suppliers. Do you mean you have just SQ type checked them, or have you done a B and S? So I assume that's sort of done in Bradstreet. So in terms of perhaps, I don't know, Phil or Peter, can you just talk through the vetting process for suppliers on the framework?
You're muted, Phil.
Phil, you're on mute still. We can't hear you.
Okay, maybe we're having some technical problems. Yes, we did go through the SKEB process, but suppliers were checked for financial standing via D&B. Also, their accreditations were checked via the various organisations that the suppliers were accredited with.
And just for clarity, and I think it was my mistake, so apologies to the questioner. I thought it said D&S, in my head was Dun & Bradstreet, but disclosure and barring was what DBS, so criminal record check.
Yes, yes, but I would always say that at time of award, that needs to be checked again with the relevant supplier, because they do have staff turnover. So maybe if you're calling off in 12 months' time, the staff's change, it will be sensible to ask again, which we can do on your behalf. But if you have a long-term contract, that's something that you should speak to your supplier about.
Okay. I think just to add to that, Peter, it's worth mentioning over the life of the framework, we're monitoring the suppliers in the background. So the mandatory criteria we set for each lot, we're making sure they're maintaining those accreditations, that their financial standing isn't changing, that their insurances are up to date. So we're proactively making sure that stuff isn't expiring, that we've got evidence of the latest stuff before it goes out of date. So the bar that we originally set is the same bar that we're maintaining throughout the life of the framework.
Okay, final call for any further questions. Yeah, here we go. So it's a question in relation to first question is in relation to TUPE. So how does TUPE apply? Should a member have a contract to call off?
I'll try and take this one this time. So TUPE obviously is a contractor to contractor process. And the law is the law, it applies. So it would really depend on the type of procedure you're looking at. So for a further competition, we would always ask the incumbent contractor for a copy of the employee's liability information, and wherever possible to provide that as part of the tender process. Now, you can get into all sorts of strange scenarios where the incumbent contractor's not being particularly timely and helpful, where the information's potentially unreliable. So you can, as a member, do some due diligence against that. So, if we're talking about servicing contracts and they give you a list of names and you don't believe they work on your contract, there's nothing to stop you going comparing that with all the certificates you've had in the last 6 months and sort of say, well, does this individual work on a contract or not? I think reality in 2021, there isn't so much of that happens as maybe there was 5-10 years ago. I think contractors are better and they see that next week the shoe will be on the other foot. So it's one of those things we don't see happen very often, but invariably making sure that when contractors are pricing competitions, that they have the right information so that they're not pricing unnecessary risk, which will put the price up to members. And secondly, no one wants to enter into a contract and on day one be told the TUPE list wasn't what we thought it was, and so the price that's been bid is going to vary by X and Y because those T's and C's are different to the ones that we received during the tender process. So really it does depend on the situation, and we've developed processes for managing that through further competitions. It does start with get the ELI from the incumbent contractor and share that with the bidders is the way to do that. There is some good TUPE guides from ACAS, and there is also some statutory timescales for sharing information, those sorts of things. It should be mentioned that it is possible to do TUPE with shorter timescales, despite what contractors get very nervous. they're set out, I think the phrase is sort of wherever possible. So if it's not possible, you can accelerate that process. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Question now for Sarah, which is, I wonder if you could give some examples of social value exercises that have been undertaken. Maybe obviously not directly in relation to this framework as it's brand new, but perhaps on some other Fusion frameworks that use the same process.
Yeah, I had a look earlier actually in anticipation of this question. So on this framework previously, I mean, it's the whole spectrum of delivery options really that you'll see depending on the start of the contract, the size of the contract, sorry. So there was quite a lot of training for local residents, training for internal members of staff. And then obviously on the larger contracts, we did have a lot of apprentices placed on various different contracts. The best thing I can say about the most positive examples of social value activity is that they're always based on what the member wants to see happen. And I think there's a real opportunity as a result of everything that's happened over the last 12 months to really think about what these contracts can do for you, what they can achieve for your organisation. I know a lot of our members are looking very closely about youth employment opportunities, and they're asking their suppliers to focus almost exclusively on social value delivery options that are targeted at that age group and helping that group of young people to secure training leading to meaningful employment. So I think there's a real opportunity on this framework and on all of our frameworks actually to start targeting social value to where it's needed most, but you have to have the conversation up front. If you get to the end of year one on a contract and your supplier says we did 10 workshops in schools and that wasn't what you wanted to see happen, you don't get that opportunity back. So that conversation at the start of the process is really important.
And just as sort of an associated follow-up, if a member undertook a number of projects through the framework, could this be aggregated together for social value purposes? So if for example, there were 3 or 4 different call-offs, is it then possible to aggregate that together?
Yeah, it depends on who you're delivering for. So if you're delivering a contract as a single supplier in Scotland and again in London, then it wouldn't be appropriate to aggregate the delivery over those 2 contracts because clearly those members will have different expectations. If you're a supplier delivering multiple contracts for a member, then yes, aggregating your delivery makes complete sense and it opens up the opportunities to recruit apprentices and to create employment opportunities because the sum of those contracts is that bit.
And could a member do that with different suppliers?
I think that could be an interesting conversation as long as the suppliers were willing to work together. I can't think of an example of that having happened in the past, but the model is flexible enough so that I wouldn't say at this stage, no, you can't do that. If that made sense and it was linked into a project in the community, then it's for us to enable that delivery, not to put barriers in the way.
Okay, thanks. So I think this next question's for Peter or for Phil. What types of call-off contracts can be used for any of the services procured?
Well, we try to be flexible. Quite often on the compliance side, we use JCT measured term contract, and for the consultancy lots, we have our own bespoke deed of appointment. But a member can use any form of call-off contract they want within reason. So we have used the ACE form, and with lifts we've used the LEAR contracts in the past. So there is flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so final.
I'll just
Sorry, Phil.
Just add on to that. Obviously, when you come to a further competition, to your competition, you have the opportunity to develop those terms. In a direct award, if you take those model form contracts, and it doesn't matter whether it's NEC, JCT, whatever flavour you choose, many of the principal terms are very similar. We're still all working within the 30-day payment terms, and yes, there are flavours and there's different language, but essentially what we're sort of saying is those model form contracts, they are all listed in the framework agreement, but they're broadly commensurate, and actually with amendments you can make them all do very different things and either look very similar or very different. So our approach to that is actually, does it materially impact on price? Are you materially changing the terms of the competition? If you spell that out in your further competition at the point of running that tender, we have no problem with those terms being different. And we do see other framework providers where they're prescribing everything. I think from our perspective, we'd rather be more flexible than that and give you the opportunity to put the terms you want in when we're running those competitions.
Okay, thanks very much. So final call for any further questions. Okay, yeah, we've got one more. Do you have standard specifications in place that members could use for call-offs?
Yes, we have a specification for each lot. It's still reasonably high level, so once again it allows flexibility, but we feel it covers the requirements of each lot, and they are free for our members to use.
I think I will just develop on that very slightly. So we did go back to look at all the individual specifications for the lot. So some of those are sort of almost started from scratch, and some of them are sort of existing and developed. We've actually broken it down into a model this time with 3 components. So we have a lot specific specification, which is very technical in its nature, specific to the substance of that lot. We have a general specification, which covers all the things like KPIs, service level agreements, reporting, management information, all those things, contractor terms that are fairly generic. And we have a third document, which is employees' requirements, which is one that we expect will be changed for each member. So the member specific stuff tends to now be in that employees' requirements document. The other 2 documents are changeable. They're there as templates, but actually a lot of the work we see, people sort of say, well, we're not reinventing the wheel. Everyone else must be doing asbestos surveying. We just want some asbestos surveyors, but we've got this little bit of a bit here we need for IT, and that's where between that sort of technical spec, the general spec, and then that employees' requirements, we can plug in those. Well, we just need this little bit in there, and actually without you having to do huge amounts of writing specifications, build a competition that meets your needs in line with all the ACOPs, etc., etc. So, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, we've got one more a question. Is there going to be a third-party audit framework for all compliance areas? It's difficult to find them outside. Of contractors who want to work and not audit.
I mean, I'll take this. The framework was not principally set up for auditing, but there are suppliers that will and can audit. So one of the differences with this framework is you can have a call-off across multiple lots. And in the old framework, it wasn't as easy to do that. So if you took, let's say, multidisciplinary compliance and you said, well, we want some asbestos consultants, Legionella consultants, fire safety consultants, actually what we want to do is go on to do some auditing. You could appoint somebody that isn't your consultant or isn't your contractor and go and do some audits. So it is possible to do that. We also have 2 other frameworks where auditing might come in. So we have a consultants framework, which we're renewing later in the year. Again, it won't have a dedicated auditing lot. We do it within our heating framework. We have the likes of electrical and gas audits within that framework. So really depending on members' needs, there are options for audits. It depends on how many, what sort of sizes, if you're just looking for someone independent to who you're currently using, or whether you've got a great big program of audits. So the frameworks were not principally set up purely to do auditing, but if that's the nature of the requirement, pick up the phone, give Peter a call. He can explore it a bit further and see if there's a way that we can fulfill that for you.
Okay, brilliant. Final call for questions. Okay, so I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm going to sort of wrap up the session, which hopefully you found really informative and insightful. I think the messages we get from it is that yes, this is a new an exciting new framework that builds on the successes of Fusion's previous frameworks. Flexibility has been built in where possible, and above all, the message is that these frameworks will continue to deliver value to our members and social value outcomes that again offer as much flexibility as can be required. If you need further information, please do visit our website www.fusion21.co.uk. Please then pick up the phone or drop an email to Peter as the framework manager, or of course you could always contact myself or my colleague Lindsay Coombs as member relationships managers. So finally, if you are interested and you haven't had details, our next webinar is on Thursday at 11:30, which is discussing the issue of materials and material supplies and issues that members and the supply chain are currently facing. So again, if you haven't had details of that webinar, please do visit our website. So finally, just to thank again Sarah, Peter and Phil for their contributions, and thank you to you, our audience, for listening and for the questions that you put forward. Have a great rest of the afternoon and hope to see you all soon. Goodbye.